Hey y'all, Vincent Zeng here, the Wandering Warrior, bringing you guys another Taiwanese story, which is about the Hakka people, who often lived on the borderlands back in the frontier days of Formosa, Taiwan as we know it today. You know, I realized a lot of people are pretty ignorant about this whole entire millions-strong ethnic group. You know, if you don't really know anything about the Hakka, do you really know anything about Taiwan? Our story begins in the 1120s. The Jurchen warriors invaded the Chinese empire of the Song dynasty. They expanded into northern China, and while the Song regrouped in the south, waves of refugees would follow. They were called Hakka, or客家in the later Mandarin language, meaning guest people. However, these refugees were despised by the locals, and without their own province and governance, they became hardy, self-sufficient, and thrifty people living in the marginal highlands. By the late 1500s, there were already Hakka in Taiwan. In fact, many Hakka served as translators between the Dutch East India Company and the indigenous Taiwanese during the 1600s. Coming to Taiwan was not an easy choice, yet on the frontier was the promise of freedom and prosperity. At least, that's what the snakeheads would tell you. Headmen, or what we today call snakeheads, would help migrants get to Taiwan. Leaving home and leaving behind their families and the protection of their clans, the only sure thing in their violent world. Across the turbulent Taiwan Strait was an island with fierce headhunting tribes and Minnan people who were also colonizing, and they were often the traditional enemies of the Hakka back on the mainland. Yet many Hakka did come, and they carved out new lives on the frontier. Immigration in the past was often a tragic affair, and here is an English translation of a poem from a Hakka, a sad song about migrating to Taiwan. I urge you, gentlemen, never migrate to Taiwan. Taiwan very much resembles the Gate of Ghosts. Of the 1,000 people who go, not one returns. It's impossible to know whether they live or died. In case you have the temerity to visit graveyards, Taiwan all over has mountains of perished people. The various crafts and trades there are unprofitable. Making money, to be honest, is as hard as eating shit. But snakeheads will tell you that Taiwan is great, that making money there is just like drawing water. Their words may be as glib as those of a prostitute, but friends, you cannot believe their stories at all. Everyone has to pay the price of passage in full, apart from those who pay in Taiwan upon crossing. But the big boat lies firmly moored in the harbor, waiting for a good wind and for suitable weather. It happens you have to wait for 2 or 3 months, and people have to sell their sons, daughters, they sell their clothes, their blankets, and curtains, waiting for the ship's departure. They have no food. Then there are those who stay and leave by boat, but their sufferings on board are really gruesome. Seasick, they keep vomiting even gall, and they lie in that boat like people about to die. But if you have a good wind, things will go easily. In 3 days and 2 nights, you will arrive in Taiwan. As soon as you come on land, you see its misery. When you discern a few hundred thatched sheds, these look just like the outhouses back in China, are no different from the straw shacks of beggars. When you find relatives to stay with for a while, their welcome already wears thin after 3 days. People say that Taiwan produces so much rice. That is absolute bullshit, the lies of a prostitute. When it's talk of food, tears gush from my eyes, and when I hold a bowl of rice, my rage explodes. In one bowl of rice, there's not 100 kernels, it's mixed with large chunks of sweet potatoes. At all 3 meals, sweet potatoes. He goes on and on about banditry and poverty and trickery on the parts of the snakeheads. Truly a shit life for a borderlander. Yet they did come and they settled all over Taiwan, but most notably around the Hsinchu, Miaoli region with its hills and valleys. They must have competed with local Taukas and Saisiat and eventually Dayal Highlanders, as well as the Minnan colonists on the lowlands. Nestled into the Miaoli Hills in fortified villages centered around powerful local clans, they lived tough lives devoted to labor, agriculture, the production of tung oil, and in logging and camphor industries. They provided highly valued blacksmithing and gunsmithing services to the local indigenous people who traded forest products for them. While some did find profit and power on the frontier, many Hakka lived brutish and precarious lives. There's many varieties of Hakka. It seems the Miaoli and Pingdong Hakka mostly speak the Sixian dialect, while many in Hsinchu speak the Hailu dialect, and their forefathers came from different parts of Hakka country back in China. Unlike the Hakka of today's Yunlin and Jiayi counties, the Xingzhou Miaoli Hakka were able to hold on firmer, perhaps due to geography. Even today, this region is considered a stronghold of Hakka culture, and here they eked out a living on the frontier for centuries. Here in the northwest of Taiwan, they became known as tough frontiersmen and sharpshooters, using their matchlock muskets and blades very skillfully. In fact, when the French invaded Taiwan, the Qing dynasty recruited Hakka frontiersmen to help fight them off. Let me take you south to where I'm at. In today's Kaohsiung and Pingtung counties, the Hakka dominated a long north to south stretch of fertile farmland and formed the 6 teams, 六队, for mutual protection. With their backs to the mountains facing the coast, today's Meinong formed the rightmost team, while Jiadong in the south formed the left. The coasts were dominated by Minnan-speaking Holo people, and the highlands by Paiwan and Drukai natives. Interspersed nearby were Minnan and Plains natives such as the Makatao. This autonomous group of Hakka eventually saw profits from the rice trade, allowing the head clans to build large mansions and sustain numerous fighting men. The 6 teams militia army was put to the test during the Lingshuangwen rebellion. This Tiandi-Hui insurgency initially defeated the Qing dynasty forces and then attempted to exterminate Hakka and other ethnic rivals. The Hakka, Quanzhou-descended Minnan, Holo people, and native allies helped to contain the Tiandi-Hui long enough for the Qing military to arrive and crush the rebels. Further south in Longyao, the Hakka were trading guns to the Sakalu, as well as intermarrying with these natives, while occasionally fighting with them as well. Gradually, the Hakka would also spread east. In 1895, the Japanese Empire invaded Taiwan, and while many ethnicities resisted, the Hakka were particularly notable for their ferocity. It's easy to see how these Borderlanders, making a living on the frontier between the Qing Empire and indigenous-ruled lands, would not submit easily to conquest. In Xingzhou and Miaoli, the Hakka guerrillas fought stubbornly, and although facing better trained and better armed Japanese military, they bogged down the invasion, slowing the Japanese advance on Zhanghua. Later, in the south, the southern Hakka militias would be defeated by the Japanese at Jiadong. They would then retreat and make a last stand at the Battle of Tangshan, near today's Pingtung City. When the Japanese arrived, they found Tangshan surrounded by a stone wall and an entire population armed. The Japanese tried storming the village, but were driven back several times. After hours of fighting, the Japanese resorted to a massive bombardment to set fire to the village. More than half the defenders were killed in hand-to-hand combat, and the village was entirely burned down. Generally, Hakka resistance was met with massacre, the burning of villages, and mass rape. When the KMT, Kuomintang, or the Chinese Nationalist Party, fled to Taiwan after losing the mainland, some initially welcomed them. As the Hakka had suffered centuries of ethnic warfare between Chinese ethnicities as well as Japanese conquest, the potential of a pan-Han Chinese state seemed promising. Yet the Chinese nationalists unleashed an era of martial law and oppression, and their assimilationist policies hurt local culture. But as they had in the past, the Hakka persevered. Today, many do complain that the kids aren't learning the language fully, and some of the Hakka practices centered around clans and village life are fading. Yet, Taiwan has progressed, and the Hakka sense of kinship remains. Today, Taiwan's Hakka constitute roughly 15% of the population and live in a thriving democracy. Something that their ancestors could only have dreamed of.
Maybe in the end, the Hakka did end up finding that land of freedom and prosperity here, just hundreds of years later.